Hey everyone, my name is Rick Gualtieri and this is Tales of a Midlist Author. Welcome back. Today, what I wanted to talk about was one of the steps in my editing process, which I would call both my favorite step and also my absolute least favorite step, and it's my final step in editing a book, which is text to speech editing. Now, I think I've mentioned it before. My editing cycle tends to be kind of long. In fact, it's kind of a running joke in my Facebook group that I'm like perpetually editing. And the reality is, it's I won't say it's true, but I mean, the reality is I probably spend more time editing than writing, only because I want to put out like a super polished product, basically the best book I can. And writing is kind of getting those ideas down, getting the story down, but editing is really like taking that stone and polishing it till like you can see a reflection in it. And you know so I want to make sure that everything I put out there shines. I don't like to put out like a half-assed effort. If the story is like if somebody doesn't like the story, that's one thing. But just putting out a shoddy product from like a formatting or or an editing standpoint, I'm not big on that. So my steps real quick, and then we'll get to text to speech and why I use that is I write my first draft, my second draft, my third draft. Each one polishing up. I send out to beta readers, usually maybe about a dozen per book. Get it back. I send it out to Megan, my editor. She usually does a kick-ass job, of tightening up a story. Comes back to me. I send it out for proofing, and then that final step is that text to speech, because then we pretty much have a product that is ready for launch, but I want to go through it one last time as kind of a sanity check, and that's what text to speech is. It's a sanity check. What is it is not it's not meant to be a replacement for the human eye, um, true editing. It definitely is not. It really is just kind of a last step for polishing. And I mean, text to speech is something I do for all of my books. Um, you know, I mean, for my shorter books, sometimes I like, I condense efforts. So like, instead of maybe releasing a seventh draft for like a shorter novella, maybe I'll release something like, like a fourth or fifth draft. But text to speech is something I do for every single one of my stories that goes out there. In fact, all of my old stories that are out there, I have gone back and done text to speech just to polish them up. That's how much I believe in it. So, what is text to speech editing? Well, it is where you take your editing program. In my case, I use Microsoft Word, and you enable the speech functionality on it. I think in more recent versions of Word, it comes by default. It comes turned on by default, but in earlier versions, I know at least, what's it, Word 2013 and below that, you had to like go in there and purposely turn it on, and it's pretty easy. Google, Microsoft Word, your version, and then speech, and there's like pretty simple instructions. It's usually like a couple clicks to turn it on. Um, what that then does is it enables the speech functionality. You turn on your speakers, you highlight the section of text you want, and you hit play, and it reads it back to you in a monotone voice. Now you can adjust the voice and you can adjust the speed and all that stuff. I usually pretty much just leave it by default because I'm not looking to it's not an action scene for me. It's editing, but you can do that as you please, and I do that for the entire book. So, and I've put this out there for a while. I've been doing this for God a couple of years now, um, and like I said, I'm definitely sold on it. But I also kind of hate it. But then I'll explain to that why. But the first thing I usually see out there is when I put this out on a forum, and I mention it's one of my steps. I'll see somebody say, "Yeah, I agree," but I like to read it back to myself instead of have the computer, and I tend to disagree there because I also read my books back to me or back to myself, with my own voice aloud, and I do that in earlier steps. I primarily do that for dialogue, and the reason for that is if the dialogue sounds clunky coming out of my mouth, it's probably going to look clunky on the page, and I want to make sure that my dialogue feels like real human speech. Um, However, I don't like it as an editing method outside of dialogue for the simple fact that there's the human factor. Um, I know what words are supposed to be there, so sometimes my brain fills in the blanks that actually are blanks in the page, and as a result, I find it doesn't really help as much. Whereas having a program or a computer read it back to you, it doesn't care about inflection. It doesn't care about the human factor. If there's a missing word there, it will let you know that there's a missing word there, and you will hear it. And that's why I like that. So Upsides for using it are that, well, it's better than having than human eyes, and even with multiple eyes, with beta readers and editor proofer, it can still catch things that slip by. Um, it like because it's pretty unforgiving. That's why I use it as, once again, that last line of defense before launch. Um, it catches typos really well. Now, what I usually advise people to do is don't just like put on headphones and lean back and like listen, is actually have the document up in front of you and read along as Word does that, because then you can edit on the spot, fix it, and move on. It's not the most interesting thing in the world, I'll warn you there, but I find that works best for me, rather than just like putting on headphones, leaning back, closing my eyes, because in my case I probably will fall asleep, or I will zone out and miss like three chapters, which I don't want to do because that makes the whole process pointless. So it is awesome for catching typos. Anytime you misspell the as te, it will it will unflinchingly let you know that. Missing words, I know I tend to miss a lot of to, and it'll find those no problem, because you're listening and it's like, wait, let's back up and fix that. What it is also awesome for is words with similar spellings that sound different. So, for example, just last week I was doing some text-to-speech editing on a relatively short story, and one of the characters is a colonel. I read it through several times and didn't realize that I had at least in 5 spots, instead of colonel, I had colonial, which my human eyes did not catch because they both look similar. But listening back, it was like colonial so and so. I was like, well, that's wrong. So I did a quick search, find and replace, and found out that I had multiple places in there. And you know, would any readers have spotted that? Debatable. I think some of them might have, but I think in a lot of cases they might have done the same thing, just filled in the blanks with their mind. But nevertheless, I didn't want it in there, and it's fixed now. It can also help with grammar. It's not going to tell you, okay, change this comma for a semicolon, stuff like that. But in areas where there should be breaks in the text, you'll be able to hear it if that break is missing. So if you should have a comma breaking up a sentence and the sentence just kind of rambles on as a run-on, you'll be able to hear that difference when Word reads it back to you, and it will sound kind of kind of weird there, and it'll kind of give you a hint that, okay, maybe this is a good place to do that. So it is limited help with grammar as well. Moving along, it's not perfect. One downside, or there's a couple downsides to it, is, and probably the biggest downside is it's not really good for homophones. And those are words that are spelled differently but sound the same. So TO versus TWO, pair versus pair. I know the two different spellings of phased are stuff that I've screwed up in the past, and having it read back to you will not catch that. I mean, if you're eagle-eyed and you're reading it along, sometimes you will, but if you're primarily relying on your ears, you're not going to catch that. So that is one downside to it. 2, I mentioned this before, it is boring as fuck. More than once I've fallen asleep in front of my keyboard and had to start all over again, just because listening to it, this drone on in this monotonous voice, is just terrible. But that's part of that's part of what makes it awesome, is the fact that it doesn't care about inflection or anything. It's just reading it back to you. So I usually like to break up a day where I'm doing text to speech. I can't do 8 hours straight of that, because that will kill me. So that is one major downside. And I will say it does take a while. I would say on a good day, I can usually get through about 20,000 words, which is about, coincidentally, about the length of one of the shingle stories that we tend to put out there, me and the Authors and Dragons guys. I can listen to about 20,000 words a day without losing my mind and get through that. The downside, though, is I mostly write novels. So if I have a 100,000 word novel, well, that's going to take me most of the work week. If I have a 200,000 word novel, that's 2 weeks worth of work right there. And that's assuming I don't need a break, which chances are I will, because doing that 10 days in a row will also drive me insane. And another thing that I find is that slows it down a little bit is when I make a correction, especially if it's more than one word in a paragraph, I will go back and have it read that paragraph again, because personally, what I don't want to do is, I find just the height of embarrassment is fixing a typo only to introduce another typo. So if I fix something, I at least make it read back that sentence to me, just to make sure that okay, I got it right. And I'm glad I do that because on occasion I have screwed that up where I've said, oh, let me fix this, type. And oh, let me read that back. Oh, wow, I fixed it and then broke something else. So that's another thing. So it is not quick, and I know some people are really big on. I got to get the book out there. I got to get the book out there. So if you are that type, this might not be the best editing for you. But if you are all about the quality and such, this is a super thing, a super awesome technique to add to your arsenal. Oh, and I remember what I was going to mention before. Remember how I mentioned reading dialogue aloud? Well, it also helps for dialogue because if word, clunky as it sounds, makes your dialogue sound clunky, that maybe is a clue that you should go back and say it aloud again because it might actually be clunky. So that's another upside. So, you know, I don't see it going away anytime soon. It does add time to everything I do, but the polish it puts there, is not perfect. I mean, the most perfect book I've put out there, I've still had people be like, hey, I found like this, and as I said, homophones or so, somebody will point out, hey, you spelled phased with a PH and it should be with an F. It's like, damn it. But hey, we do what we do. This gets that. I find doing this brings it to that 99.9% level where it's like, this book is pretty shining and I'm willing to put this book next to any professional book out there, which makes me happy because makes it a polished product. Downside, as I said, takes a long time and it is boring as hell. So, if you're looking for a cure for insomnia at night, this is it. I'll tell you that much. Just be forewarned that whatever you didn't pay attention to or miss, you're going to have to go back and do it again, because if you listen to 10 chapters and you're not paying attention, then the whole point is you've just wasted your time. All right, that is that text-to-speech editing. I hope that helps you. And my name is Rick Gualtieri. This is Tales of a Midlist Author, and I will talk to you guys again really soon.